Welcome, everyone, to the session on the power of Upsert and external IDs. We'll go ahead and get started. First things first, Salesforce recommends that you make all your purchasing decisions based on features that are currently available on the platform. Thankfully, everything I'm teaching you today is already available. My name is Doug Ayers. I'm a Salesforce MVP, senior developer at Gears CRM, and the Nashville Developer Group Leader. I hold multiple certifications, and I write and blog about Salesforce solutions on my website at douglascayers.com. And you can also find me on Twitter at douglascayers. A little bit about Gears. We are a gold Salesforce partner. We have over 60 employees, all working remotely, and our focus is on communities, Service Cloud, and data integrations. Today, we're going to talk about what is external data integration. We'll go over a traditional approach, and then we're going to introduce the concept of Upsert and external IDs. And then I'm going to demo that concept doing something fun, like populating your sandboxes with data. Then we're going to come back and talk about best practices and how this fits into a master data management strategy, and we'll take some questions. So external data integration, what is that? That's where we're going to use your system of engagement, Salesforce, but the data that you're using there doesn't originate in Salesforce. It originates somewhere else. It's not the system of record. Your data may be coming from an ERP system, a legacy database, or maybe a trade show file. And when we load this data into Salesforce, it's usually not a one and done thing. Your company may want to refresh Salesforce with updates, maybe weekly or daily. And when we're in this situation, two big questions come up. One, how do I know the second time around that this account has already been loaded? How do I know I need to do an update here rather than another insert? And then secondly, what about those relationships? How can I efficiently load the contacts under the correct accounts or the line items under the correct opportunities without too much back and forth with the system? In a traditional approach, or at least how I started, I would have my CSV file of the data I wanted to load. Maybe these are some accounts. And the only way I knew, well, do these even exist in Salesforce, is I needed to go out to Salesforce, export those records, and then with the two files, do some Excel VLOOKUP cross-reference to try and find a match. Maybe on something that was common between the two data sets, maybe matching by account number or name and address. If I found matches, then I would know I could do an update. I now know what the Salesforce record ID is. But for the ones that didn't match, assume those are new, and you do an insert. And then when you get around to needing to load the contacts, well, we have that account ID field. Well, I need to know what the Salesforce account ID is. So I'm back there exporting accounts from Salesforce, doing more VLOOKUP cross-references. And then when it's time to load the contacts, I also need to cross-reference against the records that exist in Salesforce to know whether I'm going to insert or update those. And you can see that this goes on and on for every other lookup field that I need to do. It's a lot of spreadsheets that I'm having to manage and keep all the formulas right, and it's a big hassle. You're having to pull down a lot of data. And then what happens when we make a mistake? You know, everything goes wrong. Hopefully you're finding and figuring that out in a sandbox, but what happens if it occurs in production? I mean, it could have disastrous effects. For example, if you're in the healthcare industry, you might have loaded medications to the wrong patients. And now the doctors are working off bad information. Maybe email alerts went off, and now you've got HIPAA violations. Or perhaps you're in the financial services industry, and just one minor human error data entry, we've now loaded the wrong account balances to your customers. And now you have angry, panicked clients calling your service desk. Not a good situation to be in. And how do we roll all that data back? I hope you have a good Salesforce backup and restoration tool on hand. So this manual approach, the traditional approach that I started out with, it's tedious, it's error-prone, and it doesn't scale. Especially when you get into the hundreds of thousands and millions of rows, that's just way too much data that you're having to download, burning through too many API calls. And Excel, or whatever spreadsheet program you're using, might not even be able to handle that data in memory. There's got to be a better way, and there is. The Upsert operation to the rescue. Okay, funny word, so let's level set. Insert, which you all may be very familiar with, always creates new records. It'll generate a new Salesforce ID. The update operation makes changes to existing records for records whose Salesforce ID you already know. The Upsert operation is a hybrid between the two. Salesforce will intelligently insert or update the data in Salesforce based on the existence of that record by matching to an external ID field. Let's walk through a diagram. Starting on the left, you'll have your data. This might be data from your ERP system, such as customers or orders. Might be something from a legacy database, or those leads we acquired from the trade show. Then using the data loader of your choice, you'll perform the Upsert operation, matching on an external ID field, and we'll get into the details here in a second. Salesforce will receive that data, and then it'll start to look against the database, maybe against that account or contact object, to say, hey, do I already have any data that matches on that external ID field? If no matches are found, then it'll do an insert for you. If exactly one record is found, it'll do an update instead. If 2 or more records are found, that's a bit of an ambiguous case, and Salesforce is going to kick those out as errors. Okay, been talking about external IDs. What are those? Simply put, it is a custom text or number field with the external ID option checked. I like to use text fields for this purpose because they can hold up to 255 letters, characters, and numbers, so it's a lot of flexibility. The values that you want to store in these custom external ID fields that we're going to set up are, of course, the unique record identifiers from the system that we're loading the data from. Now, by creating this field and marking it as an external ID, it's going to be imbued with a couple superpowers. First, it's searchable, so your users will be able to find it in the global search. And secondly, it's going to improve your filter performance wherever you might be filtering on these field values, whether it's a list view, a report, or in your SQL queries. Okay, so enough talk. Let's get into the meat of why y'all came here. We're going to walk through a use case of populating sandboxes. Now, I like this example for 2 reasons. One, it clearly shows how we can take data from an external system, in this case a production instance, and load it into another Salesforce instance, our sandbox. And secondly, it's something practical you can take home with you today, even if you don't have an integration project on the horizon. Now, to set up for this example, we need to do 3 things. In our sandbox or your target org, you'll need to create an external ID field on the objects that you're going to be loading data into. Then, we're going to export the data from production as is. We won't have to make any changes to get it into the sandbox. And then lastly, we're going to walk through how do we load that data into the sandbox using the Upsert and external IDs. All right. I'm going to pull up. This is our production org. It's really just a dev org, but for all intents and purposes. And we've got some accounts, contacts, and opportunities. And we want to bring this into our sandbox or any other Salesforce org. Now, I've gone ahead in this target destination. I've already created the external ID. And very simply, it was a custom text field with the external ID option checked. Nothing fancy here. And we can see that it has no data loaded. Okay. Now, for the sake of time, I have already gone into the production org and exported that data. And here we're looking at the contacts file, and I've got the production ID, the production account lookup ID, and any other fields that I want to bring over. Now, the important thing to note is I'm not manipulating this file. I'm not going to do any cross-reference lookups. That's the big point here. Now, the third step is we need to now load this data into our sandbox. I'm going to be using the Apex data loader, but you could use any ETL tool of your choice. We're going to be choosing the Upsert operation. And we'll load these in dependency order. I'm going to start with my accounts. Now, the first question when you do Upsert is Salesforce wants to know what field are we going to be matching on? What field is it going to be looking at to know whether the record already exists? In this case, I'm picking that account external ID field that we had previously set up. And then, just like you would do if you were inserting or updating, you'll do your field mappings. And because the production and sandbox orgs have the same fields, it's very simple one-to-one, with one subtle change. We're not going to map the account ID field into the sandbox account ID field. When Salesforce decides to insert these new accounts, it's going to generate a new ID. That's why we're going to store this value into the custom external ID field. I'm just going to map it into this other field, and we'll use that later. And we just let that run. OK. And we see here, we'll refresh, and we have our accounts. And we can see that the sandbox ID is different than what the production external ID was, and that's expected. OK, well, let's walk through loading our contacts. We'll choose the Upsert operation, contact object, pick our file. Now remember, that's the contacts file that I exported from production, and I haven't changed it yet. It has no idea about the Salesforce account, the sandbox account IDs. Now the first question we always answer is, what field on the object we're loading into is it going to use for matching? So I'm choosing my contact external ID on the contact object. Salesforce knows that contacts have lookup fields. One of them is the account, which is what we're interested in. I don't have the sandbox account ID in my file, but I do have something else. I have that production ID that we loaded into the account external ID field. And so here with Upsert, we know about external IDs, and so that's what I'm going to tell Salesforce here. Identify the account based on its external ID value. We go into our field mapping strategy. And just like we would do for insert or updates, just auto-match those with two subtle changes. That account ID, again, we're not mapping it into the account ID field in the sandbox. I don't know what the actual Salesforce ID is in that instance. So we're going to delete that mapping, and instead, we now have this account external ID field that we can choose. This tells Salesforce, do an indirect lookup on that account by this external ID value. Salesforce will do all the cross-reference lookup for us. All we have to do is do the field mapping. And then again, we're not loading the production contact ID into the sandbox ID field, but rather into these external ID fields. But all other fields can be mapped the same. OK, next, let that load. Come check. What do we got? And there we go. And then we get our contacts loaded to the right accounts. All right, well, let's walk through this one more time with opportunities. I'm going to pick our object, pick that same file. We would just pulled it straight out of production. No manipulations needed. What field are we going to match on for the opportunity? The external ID field that we had set up earlier. And again, that's just a text or number field marked as external ID. Nothing fancy. Opportunities also have a lookup field. How are we going to identify the accounts? Well, we know what that external ID value is. We'll pick that field. Do our field mappings, just like we did with contacts, with the two subtle changes. Change that account ID lookup to now refer to the external ID, so that Salesforce will do that lookup for us, which we had, in the traditional approach, been doing with Excel, VLOOKUP, and cross-reference formulas. Then with the opportunity ID from production, map that into the external ID field in the sandbox. Click OK. Next, go. Boom. Let's go see what showed up here. And there we get our opportunities. Now, that seems pretty cool, but anyone can load data once. Where's the value of when we come back and we need to load this again, next Wednesday, next Thursday? Well, if I were to be using the insert operation, we would be guaranteed to now show up with 62 records. But let's see what happens when we use the upsert operation. Again, I'm always using the same operation, upsert, upsert, upsert. And I'm letting Salesforce figure out, is this an insert time or an update time? So we'll do upsert, walk through the same scenario we just did with those opportunities. And I haven't changed that file. It still has no idea about the sandbox opportunity record IDs. But on this first question, what field should Upsert be looking at to know if the record exists or not? Well, This time through, that opportunity external ID field has been populated with that production ID. So now there are records that it'll match against, and it's going to do an update. Same field mappings that we needed to do before. Auto match the fields. Subtle change on the lookup fields to use the external IDs. Same with the ID. Okay. Next, finish. Boom. Refresh this. What do we got? Still 31 opportunities. And if we scroll over, we can see they were created about a minute ago, but updated now. Well, that's cool. And if we come over here, let's drill into this Edge Communications account. And we can see in 3 easy operations, we've loaded the account information, we've loaded the related contacts, and we reloaded the opportunities. All without having to download any more data than we needed for what we wanted to push to the other system. No VLOOKUPs, no cross-references, just pushing the data. All right, well, let's get back to the presentation. All right, benefits. I hope it was clear to see that this greatly simplifies the efforts when needing to do insert or update operations. We get out of the business completely of needing to know Salesforce record IDs. And these systems, these external systems that you may be needing to load data from, they don't need to be none the wiser about Salesforce. You don't need to be trying to store IDs back in that system. They can just always push data forward, and you'll just keep their identifier in Salesforce to match on. This also inherently helps prevent duplicates, because if there are matches found on that external ID value, then Salesforce will update the record instead of creating another duplicate. It also reduces the amount of API calls that you need to use, because you're not having to export any of that data down. And then when you do need to scale up to the hundreds of thousands and millions of rows, you can begin to use the bulk API with the Upsert operation. And we're also able to be setting these lookup fields indirectly all in one operation. It's pretty amazing. So best practices when using Upsert. When you create that external ID field, you want to guarantee that the value is unique in Salesforce. That's because if 2 or more records have the same value and Salesforce tries to do the Upsert, it's going to kick those out as an error because it's a bit ambiguous. And then when we talk about uniqueness, sometimes that allegedly unique value from that external system may not be unique enough when it gets into your system. For example, I'd worked with a client where they were loading patient data from multiple hospital systems into their Salesforce org. Each hospital system didn't talk to each other, and they were each assigning a patient ID in their database. In their own hospital systems, the values were unique, but not when we brought them all into the same Salesforce org. So instead, the value we stored in that external ID field was a compound value. We took the unique value of the hospital group plus that unique patient ID together, concatenated them, and then used that. Now, when talking about getting data from multiple systems, you're also starting to think about master data management. And let's say that in your org, you have some customer data in 3 different systems. Maybe some's in an ERP system, some's in a legacy database, and some somewhere else. But what you'd like to do is get one single view of that data in Salesforce, your system of engagement for your users and your customers. This is where your data governance team needs to come in, and there's a little upfront work here, but the dividends and the ROI at the end really pay off. Is try to build up what is a cross-reference for the data across all those systems. What is the ID of the data in System A, System B, and System C? Once you have that cross-reference, then you want to assign a new master record ID. And there's master data management software tools out there that can help you with this, or you can just brute force it and do it yourself. But once you have that new global record identifier, that is the value that you want to use when you upsert to Salesforce, because it's not going to change no matter how many other fragmented systems you may need to be joining data together to throw into Salesforce. And why we don't want to upsert directly from System A or System B is because it's rare that those 2 systems probably have the same common identifier. It may only know about System A ID and System B's ID. And if we were to do the upsert directly from those systems, you're just going to end up with the same fragmented data set in Salesforce, which we don't want. Now, just because I don't want to upsert directly from those systems doesn't mean we don't want those system identifiers also in Salesforce. Those are great to bring along in other custom text fields. For example, we can build mashups in Canvas apps. Because we know the identifiers for System A or System B, we can bring that data up into Salesforce for our users. Or maybe the other way around. We can provide deep links into System A or System B directly from Salesforce. And then it's just good user experience. It provides more context and familiarity for your users on page layouts and in their reports. All right. Some resources, some great blogs and videos that go into more detail about the concepts that I talked about today. And I'm going to post this session and the presentation to the chatter feed later today. And I definitely encourage you, if you are in the multiple system scenario, to check out this video, the Master Data Management Strategy for the Enterprise. It's a prior Dreamforce video and really walks through what do you need to be thinking about to plan for such a situation. And we have about 8 minutes left. And so I'll open the floor for questions. And I don't know if we have a microphone, or you'll have to come up very, very, very close. The question is, how many external ID fields can you create on a custom object? And when you create an external ID field on an object, that marks the field as an indexed field. And so there's not really a limit on external IDs, but there is a limit on how many indexed fields you can have on your object. Don't quote me, but I think the limit is somewhere around 10 or 15. So just keep that in mind, because you may, outside of just using external IDs, you may have contacted Salesforce support to add arbitrary indexes on certain fields. So, good question. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, in the back. Okay, the question was, for the Upsert, for doing data integration, does this always have to be a manual process like how I demoed it today using Data Loader? No, you can definitely automate this. Data Loader just happened to be a simple tool I used for the demo, but there are other tools that use the Salesforce API, which is really the bedrock. You're just using the Salesforce API. You could be using tools like Talend, Informatica, MuleSoft, and the list goes on to script or programmatically perform the Upsert operation. Yeah, great question. Thank you. Yes?
Would it make sense to only enable Upsert operations on such objects? Like, what if somebody by mistake does an insert instead of an Upsert?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Let's say we have a custom object, right? And let's say we have set external IDs to that, and you're expected to run an Upsert to load data into it. But what if somebody by mistake runs a create or an insert and creates new records? So wouldn't it make sense to have only Upsert enabled on such objects and disable insert?
Okay. I think the question is there ever a time where it might be bad, where you're using Upsert, your developers might be using Upsert to get data in there, but someone else might have done an insert or an update, right? All those APIs, all those operations are always available to you. The thing to keep in mind is if you're going to directly do an insert into Salesforce, if you expect it to be matched by the Upsert operation down the road to then do an update, that external ID field needs to be populated. That's really the key in all of it, is when Upsert runs, it's going to say, does a record already exist matching on that external ID field? And if there is, it'll do an update. Otherwise, it'll just do an insert. So you're still safe to do inserts and updates otherwise, but make sure that field's populated. Next question.
How long gonna take for Salesforce to ingest like a sort of big data, like a 10 terabyte or 20 terabyte data? How long gonna take? And what kind of third-party data ingestion tool you have in your mind? Okay.
I think the question is how long would it take for Salesforce to ingest or to import and process like 5 terabytes or 10 terabytes a day.
Yeah. 20.
I don't know these specific metrics, and there's really a lot of factors that are going to go into how fast can Salesforce process your data. If you have 0 triggers, 0 workflow rules, essentially 0 extra processes that are going on, then the data load is going to be faster. It's also going to be faster if you have a faster data connection to Salesforce. But if you have a lot of extra logic that needs to run, a lot of process builders, then it's going to slow down the transaction time. And if you do get into the massive amounts of data, definitely need to be looking at the bulk API, and there's some more sessions to try and figure out massive data imports. Thank you. Good question.
Yeah, I have a question on Upsert operation. Does Upsert support it on a dependent object as well? So for example, if a contact is there, it requires an account. So if I'm upserting a contact, an account may not be exist. So I want account also to be upserted in the same call. Will it be supported by Upsert?
Okay, I think the question is, when, say, you're upserting contacts, in that same operation, can it cause effects, changes to a related record, such as the related parent account? In the standard insert, upsert, update APIs, I don't believe that's possible. And I think that there's in pilot or beta a tree API, which does allow you to send a graph of data, and in the one save transaction, it'll kind of cascade update all the relationships. But out of the box, Upsert, it's only going to affect the object that you're touching.
Yeah, but the REST APIs do support, right? If I use a REST API and do an insert operation, and I can I can insert a dependent object as well. But in Upsert, it does not. That's what you mean to say?
I don't believe you can, if you do insert contacts, it's not going to also insert an account.
Okay, I had attended one of the session with Power BO, and when we use a REST API to do a post on a contact with an account information, it will create an account along with the contact.
Okay, if you're using the REST API, I'm sure there's probably a graph option there, but let's talk about that offline. This is a pretty advanced topic.
Yeah, thank you.
Good question, thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you so much.